Everyone was waiting for the guns to be drawn. But Yul Brynner ended the duel before it began, without shouting, without explaining, with just one look and one step. The Sonoran Desert. June 1967. Temperature pushing 112 degrees by 11 in the morning. The set of a western that would be forgotten by audiences but never forgotten by the crew who witnessed what happened that day. Two men stood facing each other in the dust. One was Yul Brynner, already a legend at 52, his bald head gleaming in the merciless sun, dressed in the black that had become his signature. The other was Tommy Cord, 28 years old, a rising star with 3 films behind him and a reputation for being the fastest draw in Hollywood. The crew stood in a semicircle around them. Cameras ready. Sound rolling. Director waiting. Everyone expecting to see what they'd been hearing about for weeks. Tommy Cord's legendary quick draw, the technique he'd practiced for 6 months, the speed that had made casting directors compare him to the greats. This was supposed to be a simple scene. A confrontation. Some dialogue. A draw. Cut. Move on. But something had changed in the 3 seconds before the director called action. Tommy had smiled. Not the character's smile. His own smile. The smile of someone who was about to show everyone exactly how fast he really was. Yul Brynner noticed. He always noticed. And in that moment, without a word, without moving, the entire energy of the set shifted. The director sensed it. The crew sensed it. Even Tommy, still smiling, sensed something had changed but couldn't identify what. Brynner took one step forward. Not aggressive. Not theatrical. Just one measured step that somehow made the 8 feet between them feel like 8 inches. Tommy's smile faltered. The cameras kept rolling but nobody remembered to call action. Brynner didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. To understand what happened in the desert that day, you need to understand who these 2 men were. Tommy Cord had been training for this role for 6 months. He'd worked with Jerry Miculek's predecessor, practiced 8 hours a day, studied every frame of every Western gunfight ever filmed. His draw clocked at 0.23 seconds from holster to shot. Professional competition speed. Fast enough to make audiences believe. Fast enough to make Tommy believe he was untouchable. He'd been talking about it for weeks. On set, in interviews, to anyone who would listen. Wait until you see the climax scene. Wait until you see how fast I am. Nobody in Hollywood can match this. The younger crew members believed him. They'd seen him practice. They'd watched him draw and fire before their eyes could even track the movement. It was impressive. It was exactly what Hollywood wanted. But the older crew members, the ones who'd worked with Cooper, who'd watched Eastwood, who'd been on sets when real ex-gunslingers were hired as consultants, they knew something Tommy didn't. Fast and real were not the same thing. Yul Brynner knew the difference. He'd learned it the hard way, long before Hollywood, in ways he rarely discussed. Brynner had been born in Vladivostok. He'd worked as a trapeze artist in Paris when he was barely 20, had survived the Nazi occupation, had done things to stay alive that didn't make it into press releases. By the time he became an actor, he'd already lived 3 lives most people never experience. When he played a gunfighter, he wasn't playing speed. He was playing the exhaustion of someone who'd already survived. The stillness of someone who'd already decided. That's what Tommy Cord didn't understand. And that's what Brynner was about to teach him. The desert sun beat down. Dust hung in the air. The crew waited. Tommy was still in his starting position, hand hovering near his holster, that smile now completely gone from his face. Yul Brynner stood 8 feet away, no 7 feet now after that single step, and simply looked at him. Not a glare. Not a challenge. Just looked. Tommy's hand trembled slightly. Just a micro-movement, barely visible, but everyone who was watching saw it. His character was supposed to be confident, aggressive, spoiling for a fight. But Tommy himself was suddenly uncertain. Because in Yul Brynner's eyes, Tommy saw something he'd never encountered in his Hollywood career: recognition. The look of someone who'd seen real violence, survived real stakes, and knew exactly what Tommy was about to try. And knew it didn't matter. "You're fast," Brynner said. His voice was quiet but carried across the set without effort. "I've watched you practice." "You're very fast." Tommy nodded, unsure where this was going. The cameras were still rolling. The crew hadn't moved. "How long can you be fast?" Brynner asked. Tommy's brow furrowed. "What?" "Your draw. 0.23 seconds, I heard." "Very impressive. How long can you maintain that speed?" "I don't. What do you mean?" Brynner took another step. 6 feet between them now. His hand still nowhere near his gun. His posture completely relaxed. "Can you do it twice? 3 times? Can you do it after walking 5 miles in this heat? Can you do it after 3 days without sleep? Can you do it when your hands are shaking because you haven't eaten in 2 days? Tommy's mouth opened but no words came out. "Speed is something you practice in a studio," Brynner continued, his voice still calm, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "But out here," he gestured at the desert around them, "out here, speed is just a number. And numbers don't survive. Decisions survive." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. The set was completely silent now. Even the distant highway noise seemed to have stopped. The director had lowered his megaphone, realizing something was happening that was more important than the scene they'd planned to shoot. Tommy's hand was still hovering near his holster, but the tension had gone out of it. He was no longer thinking about his draw. He was thinking about what Brynner had just said. "You want to know why I don't practice my draw?" Brynner asked. He still hadn't moved toward his own gun. "Because I decided a long time ago that if I ever had to draw a weapon, the person in front of me would already know they'd lost. Not because I was faster. Because I was more certain." He took another step. 5 feet now. Close enough that Tommy could see every line in Brynner's face, the scars that makeup usually covered, the evidence of a life lived before cameras. "Your character in this scene is supposed to challenge mine," Brynner said. "Your character is supposed to believe he can win. But right now, Tommy, right now, you don't believe that anymore, do you?" Tommy swallowed hard. His hand dropped away from his holster completely. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I don't." Brynner nodded slowly. "Good. Because that's the scene. That's what we're actually filming. Not a contest of speed. But the moment when someone realizes that all their practice, all their technique, means nothing against someone who decided weeks ago exactly how this would end." He turned to the director. "Are you still rolling?" The director nodded, speechless. "Then we just shot the scene," Brynner said. "That's your confrontation. That's your climax. A young man with fast hands meeting an old man with slow certainty. And the young man understanding, really understanding for the first time, what real means." Tommy stood in the dust, his famous quick draw forgotten, his rehearsed dialogue abandoned, and nodded. The crew burst into applause. Not the polite applause of a completed take. The stunned applause of people who'd just watched something real break through the artifice of filmmaking. While others measured speed, Brynner was already acting. The director kept that take in the film. No dialogue. No draw. Just 2 men facing each other, and one of them understanding he'd already lost. Critics later called it one of the most authentic Western confrontations ever filmed, though they didn't know the scene was never scripted. But what happened after the cameras stopped taught Tommy something deeper. Brynner walked over to where Tommy stood, still processing what had just occurred. The older actor put a hand on the younger man's shoulder. Not a congratulatory pat, but a firm grip that commanded attention. "You want to know why I did that?" Brynner asked quietly, speaking only to Tommy now while the crew began breaking down the shot. Tommy nodded. "Because I've seen what happens to actors who start believing their own performance," Brynner said. "I've seen men get hurt on sets because they confused choreography with reality. I've seen careers end because someone thought being fast in rehearsal made them bulletproof in life. He released Tommy's shoulder and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather notebook. He opened it to a page filled with handwritten notes. This is from 1951, Brynner said. A western I did early in my career. There was a stunt coordinator, ex-cavalry, real combat veteran. He taught me something I've never forgotten. He pointed to a line written in faded ink. The fastest draw I ever saw was a man who never cleared leather. He just decided, and the other man knew. Tommy read the words, then looked up at Brynner. How is that possible? Because real confrontation isn't about mechanics, Brynner explained. It's about certainty. When you've really made a decision, when you've accepted every consequence, calculated every outcome, committed completely, people sense it. Not consciously. But they know. And if they're smart, they don't test it. He closed the notebook and handed it to Tommy. Keep this. Read it when you're tempted to believe that practicing makes you invincible. Practice makes you fast. Experience makes you certain. And certainty ends fights before they begin. Tommy took the notebook with trembling hands. Mr. Brynner, I'm sorry. I was showing off. I know, Brynner said without judgment. That's why I stopped it. Not to embarrass you. To save you from embarrassing yourself when it actually mattered. He gestured at the holstered gun on Tommy's hip. You're fast with that. Really fast. But what you showed me just now, when you realized that speed didn't matter, that was real. That moment when you understood and adjusted. That's what makes an actor dangerous on screen. Not the draw. The decision. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the set went dark. The film wrapped 6 weeks later. It was released to modest box office, forgotten by most audiences within a year. But Tommy Cord never forgot the lesson in the desert. He stopped talking about his draw speed in interviews. He started studying his characters' histories instead of their mechanics. 3 years later, he gave a performance in a Sam Peckinpah film that critics called frighteningly real, not because of his speed, but because of his stillness. Tommy kept Brynner's notebook until he died. Inside the front cover, he added his own note in 1989. June 12, 1967. The day I learned that certainty beats speed. The day Yul Brynner ended a duel that never began. When asked years later what the most important moment of his career was, Tommy never mentioned his Oscar nomination or his highest-grossing film. He mentioned standing in the Sonoran Desert, hand hovering over a gun he never drew, facing a man who taught him that real power doesn't announce itself. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The leather notebook is now in the Academy Museum. Visitors can read Brynner's notes about control, certainty, and the difference between performance and truth. Next to it sits a photograph from that day. 2 men in the desert dust, one tense, one calm. The caption reads, "The fastest duel in Hollywood history. Duration 0 seconds. Yul Brynner never explained what he did that day. He didn't need to. Everyone who was there understood. Some lessons aren't taught with words. They're taught with one step, one look, and the quiet certainty of a man who had already decided.